Welcome to everyone who's joining us tonight for Tri Robinson's talk. I'm Lori Young. I'm the director of the Wilderness Institute here at the University of Montana. And this is the Wilderness Issues Lecture Series, an annual lecture series that focuses each year on a different theme. This year's theme is climate change. And this year's lecture series is sponsored by the Wilderness Institute and the Center for Ethics here at the University of Montana. Before I introduce Tri, I have a few short announcements. First of all, I'd like to thank the Dana Gallery in downtown Missoula for generously donating artwork for series promotional materials. I'd also like to remind everyone of next week's speaker, Evan Goodstein, who is joining us from Lewis and Clark College, where he's a professor of economics and the project director for Focus the Nation. He's going to be talking about how 20-year-olds will save the planet with a focus on climate change. Well, it's a real honor and privilege to introduce Tri Robinson to you. Tri Robinson is the pastor of the Vineyard for Boise, where he's a founding pastor almost 20 years ago. The Vineyard of Boise is a church of over 3,000 people. Tri is really a leader in the movement to green religion. In other words, Tri is one of the leading pastors and religious figures around the country who is working to integrate environmental concerns into both evangelical communities as well as the broader Christian community. He has a master's degree in administrative education, and he was formerly a biology teacher. He's also a prolific writer, and he's author of 2 books. The first is Saving God's Green Earth, Rediscovering the Church's Responsibility to Environmental Stewardship, and Small Footprint, Large Handprint, How to Live Simply and Love Extravagantly. Tri has also written numerous articles for Christian publications and other publications about biblical responses to environmental issues and how to integrate environmental concerns into Christianity and evangelical communities. A testament to Tri's sort of broad influence nationally is that he recently appeared on the Bill Moyers Show entitled Is God Green?, where he spoke with a national audience via television. He's a highly regarded speaker and speaks widely both to religious communities as well as universities and conservation organizations. And really, I would say that Tri is one of the leading people who is creating momentum around the issue of conservation, creation care, and environmental concerns, including climate change, both within the broader religious community in the U.S., as well as in the broader sort of public dialogue. He's really inspiring other religious leaders to take seriously caring for creation. And so with this, please welcome Tri.
Well, good evening. I wished I had that. I wished I had your introduction recorded because I'd like to play that for my church. They think I was more important than they presently think I am. I think.
Do you want me to minimize it so that you can get to your other stuff?
Oh, that's good. Thank you. Well, it is a great pleasure to be here. I feel so honored to be able to speak to such diverse groups these days, and it's such a worthy subject to be talking about, such a worthy discussion to be having between all kinds of different groups. We all share a similar concern, and we surely share the same world. And so I never take it for granted, and I count it just absolutely an absolute blessing to be able to just share my story and my heart with folks around the country. And I think that's really what I'd like to do to open, is just kind of tell you my story a bit and how this all sort of happened in my life. It is a little unusual. Now, first of all, if you're not an evangelical Christian, or you're not aware of evangelical Christianity, you might not think it's such a big deal. But if you're living in my world, it actually taking on environmental stewardship as a major ministry in your church is fairly challenging and unique. And I have a lot more friends now than I used to have, but I also have some new enemies too. So it's been quite about a 3-year journey, actually. It's funny, Nancy and I, my wife, who's here tonight, she and I met at the College of Idaho in the 60s. Now, it was the heat of the 60s, you know, this Vietnam, and a lot of you guys, you've heard about it and you think it's a long time ago. I don't think it was really that long ago. I just turned 60, so life goes by quick. I want to tell you that tonight if you're not, if you're still in your 20s, and next week you're going to hear that if you're 20, you're the one that's going to be able to change this. I actually think that there's a lot of truth in that. I would like to actually hear that lecture because I see that as very true. You are inheriting a world that I believe is in crisis in many fronts, not just environmentally. I think that many of the world crises are connected and interlinked, and so I think that when you deal with issues such as social justice issues, as human trafficking and the sex slave trade, the global hunger and health issues, all of these things, even illiteracy, these things are all interconnected and can't really be looked at as alone because none of them stand alone. We are really embarking, I believe, on what I see as almost a perfect storm in many ways. And I think these things have to be addressed very, very quickly. The 60s, and I see a lot of baby boomers in here, so I'm not alone. You'll remember the 60s. We had the same concern. But somehow it got waylaid along the way. And we were on the college campus in those days. We all saw, really, even then, we saw handwriting on the wall in terms of a world population that in my life, when I was born, the world population was 2.5 billion people. In the late 1800s, it had just broken 1 billion people, world population. By 1948, it was 2.5 billion. Presently, it is 6.8 billion. So already in my life, it's on its way to tripling, and in my life, I'm sure it will triple. And the question is, can humanity be sustained on a planet if we continue being so self-focused and so self-centered? Really something I see as sin. Can we carry on? And there has to be change. I was a biology teacher, was for 12 years, a secondary level, had gotten my degree at the College of Idaho, master's degree. And after Nancy and I met there on the college, I actually tried to get a teaching job in Idaho, but they paid, teachers in Idaho in those days were out like on starvation wages, and so I couldn't seem to get a job. So we decided to go to a family homestead in Southern California that had been in our family for 3 generations and already. And it was off the grid. Now we call it off the grid. In those days we just said we didn't have any electricity. But we did have spring-fed water and, heated the cabin there with wood heat and all. and really lived a very self-sustaining life. We lived there, raised our kids into their teen years. For the next 20 years, we lived in that situation. And being a school teacher, I had the summers free and had a very close friend, a good friend who would build, he had a team of mules, and we'd go and take contracts to build wilderness trails. So we built huge sections of the Pacific Crest Trail, which goes up through the Sierra Nevada mountains. And every summer we would pack our family into the back country, and Nancy would cook for the trail crew, and I'd work, and we'd run these mules and just grade out long stretches of this trail. And so that's sort of how I raised my kids. They were raised, in a sense, really with a deep appreciation for the wilderness. At age 16, I remember actually going to that ranch. I had just gotten my first car. It was a 1956 Volkswagen Bug with I think it had like a 40-horse engine. And I think my dad thought if he gave me a Volkswagen Bug with a 40-horse engine, I couldn't get in too much trouble speeding. But I remember the great adventure of my life. I always wanted to go up to this ranch. Nobody had been living on it for a number of years at that point. And so the great adventure as a 16-year-old was to get in this car all by myself and go up and spend a weekend alone on the ranch. And I'd been raised in denominational Christianity and had really seen, like many of my generation, little relevance really in our faith. It didn't really seem to apply to the world in crisis that we were experiencing. And so I was wrestling with all that as a young man, as a young person. And at 16, I remember I went up and I got up there and opened up the cabin and got a fire going. And, pretty soon I was bored. I realized, this solitude thing, it's about 10 minutes. It was about all I could handle. So I thought, I've got to do something. And so I decided to take a walk up this mountain. And I walked up the side of this mountain, up several miles, up into a knoll that kind of opened up. And it was a beautiful spot, actually. It's a spot I returned to many times in my life since. And I remember sitting there on this log, looking through the pine trees across just a branch of the Mojave Desert across into the Tehachapi Mountains and out into Red Rock Canyon. You could just see 100 miles, and the sun was setting that night. And a reality hit me that night that this couldn't be an accident. And that if it couldn't be an accident, my life couldn't be an accident. And that there must be some meaning behind this whole thing. And I actually asked the real questions at that particular time in my life. And then entering into a science education, I started looking at just the anatomy of a flower, and later taught physiology and anatomy, just the anatomy of the human body. I go, all these systems working together, perfectly and succinctly, that we could even, walk and communicate and do all the things that we do. I looked at this, and it was actually science that took me to the reality that there must be a divine creator and designer behind all of this. And Paul wrote to the Romans. As he opened the book of Romans, in Romans 1, he said this. He said, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, his divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that man is without excuse. Man is without excuse from knowing God, because he's revealed himself, every part of himself, even his divine nature, his unseen qualities. Everything has been revealed through creation and through nature. And so we say nature. When we say nature, we're literally saying we're looking at the nature of God, the very nature of God. And all of that was coming to me during that time. And yet through those 60s and the college years, I still couldn't totally accept that. But later, as I was married, and I guess it was because my wife was married to me, she realized she really did need God. She actually entered into this a real relationship with Christ. And 6 years later, after praying and agonizing over me, who just wanted to be a cowboy, basically, and live in the wilderness, really through the reality of creation, I realized that the Bible must be true. That there must be a God in heaven, and he must have a plan, and I wanted to be a part of that plan, and so I pursued him at that point. Well, that entered immediately into a whole new life. Within a year, I had quit education and had discovered a tribe of people in the border of Thailand and Burma. They were actually undergoing ethnic cleansing by the Burmese government. You might have even heard about it lately in the news recently. They were kind of have been a focal point before all the election stuff, but they're called the Karen people. And because of the ethnic cleansing that they were going through, they were being forced to the border of Burma and Thailand, and then even into Thailand, and being forced into refugee camps there, living up and down the Moy River and the Salween River on that border. And I had become aware of this working with a group that was really working with the persecuted church throughout the world, and decided to go see it for myself. I went with a couple of guys, and we went back in, four-wheel driving forever, and then finally boats, and finally got up into these people and saw people that were just trying to survive in this world because they had been forced without a country and forced into this very confined, really lush jungle, you know, with a river and everything that was needed really to sustain human life. They had completely denuded this area. Because when your children are hungry, you're going to do anything you can do. You know, all your values change at that point. You're going to eat anything you can eat. And I was amazed at that point as there was so much slash and burning going on, and I saw that you couldn't even in a jungle setting with this canopy where you would think, you know, you would be hearing this, you know, caw caw cuckoo, you know, there wasn't even a sound of a bird. Nothing. And the reality hit me that there is a whole piece of humanity that is suffering as a result of an environment that's in decline, that can't sustain human life in the setting that they're in. I came back from that so broken over the condition of humanity that I said, I've got to give my life to this. Quit my job, entered into the ministry at that point in time. Now, let me say this. There was a movement called the Jesus Movement in the 70s. Many of the baby boomers in the room here may remember this. There was a revival as a result, I believe, of the 60s. All of us were asking questions. You know, we saw the trouble. We saw the direction the world was going, and we were asking ourselves, you know, what can we do? You know, where is God in all this? And we were all asking questions, and some people were turning to, you know, to all kinds of things, but some actually turned then to Christian faith. They started exploring the truth of the Bible, and in the midst of that, discovered a relationship with God. And it was called the Jesus Movement. In fact, we were called Jesus freaks. And you know, in those days, you got to understand it's different. Like, you know, look at me now. I'm a preacher, you know, and I'm dressed up right now. You know, in those days, you didn't go to church without a three-piece suit on. I mean, and all these young people, this new generation was coming to faith in Christ, and they were looking for church, and there was no church. Because all of the church really had a perception that, you know, if your hair was long and you were barefooted, you weren't welcome. And so they created their own churches. And that was what we call the Jesus Movement. They said, we're not going to get baptized in some little, you know, baptismal in a church. We're going to get baptized in the ocean, or, you know, somewhere like where John the Baptist would have done it, you know. And so everything was more natural, because that was sort of our generation in those days. And there was in the midst of that, there was a theology that emerged that we know today as what we call dispensational theology. And it was really figuring out, one thing that dispensational theology did is that it really had the end times, the second coming of Christ figured out. We call it eschatology, or the study of the last days, the end of the earth and the second coming of Christ. And you got to understand, to define an evangelical is someone that believes that the Bible is true and relevant for life. We believe that there is a God that created the heaven and the earth, and that he put man on this earth and commissioned man to participate with him on the earth. Surely to use it, but not to abuse it. An evangelical believes that Christ came and brought provision for man, to set him free from the sin that separated him from God, the sin that created selfishness and self-centeredness, to create other-centeredness, a people that would have a heart for a broken world. We believe that as Jesus came and entered his ministry and quoted from the prophet Isaiah, who had prophesied 800 years before about the role of the Messiah that would come, the one that would bridge the gap between God and man. That would be the Messiah. That he would come and fulfill the prophecy of Isaiah 61, which basically said that the Spirit of the sovereign God was upon him for the purpose of setting the captive free, healing the brokenhearted, coming and ministering to the poor, and really ministering justice to humanity. That was really the role of the Messiah. That's what he would do. He would come and be for man. He would come and make provision for man for that had separated him from God. That's what an evangelical believes, and that Christ came in the first advent, or the first coming of Christ, and he would be the final sacrifice. And that he would come, and through the work that he would do on the cross would make provision for all who would come, not because of anything we'd done, not because of anything that we could earn, only because it was by grace, that is a free gift, undeserved gift, that we could receive a relationship with him through just faith, just saying yes to him, believing in him, and saying, Lord, we've tried to do life on our own. It didn't work well, especially those of us in the 60s. It didn't work well. And so we need you now. We receive you. We receive your word in faith. That's what we believe. But we also believe this, that he's coming again. And that in the second time that he's coming to make things right on this earth. Things that are really gone amiss because of self-centeredness. Where people want it, they want it now, and they want it for number one. And that's what kind of emerged out of the 60s is, these slogans like, look out for number one, and if it feels good, do it. And, love is free, and we found out it wasn't. It was pretty spendy, actually. And so coming to that, with that faith, we were really looking towards what it would look like if Christ came again. And so exploring the prophecies of the Bible, many thought they had it really figured out. And in so doing, this idea emerged, and I'm telling you this because it's bad theology in my mind, is that Christ is coming, he's coming soon, because according to his prophecy, a lot of what's going on in the world today, of the environmental decline, which was all part of the prophecy, even if you read it, you can see global warming was very clearly a part. But there was also a breakdown in relationships. There was an increase of natural disaster on the earth, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes. And we started looking around us and we were saying, Jesus must be like coming tomorrow, And in the midst of that thought emerged, it's all going to burn anyway, so why care? And so what happened is evangelical Christianity literally turned its back on the very thing that God had commissioned his people to do in the first place, and that was to be stewards and care for creation. With the idea that the only important thing is to bring people into this saving relationship with God, which is true in my mind. But yet denying the idea that we are called to accountability to the stewardship of God's stuff on this earth. His people and this planet. So a great division was created between evangelical Christianity and the rest of, especially the American society. And so those that were outside, because the Christians weren't doing it, and they weren't really doing the things, so other people were. Then we didn't like the way they were doing it, because they had this different ideas about how that should take place than we did. Especially concerning a world that was being overpopulated, and issues of sanctity of life emerged. And so great debates took up, and a great division and a great chasm took place, until finally it evolved into this place. I believe that Christians actually, the word environment really just was a dirty word. It was just a bad word. Because those was a liberal people that had this other mindset, and they were really the enemy of Christianity. Now, 3 years ago, or a little bit more than 3 years ago, an election was coming around. 2 presidential candidates were running, and I have now 2 adult children in their 30s. That one is a manager at REI, and the other one had been working for the Sierra Club, who now we have this family political debate, because you don't want to have those. But they came to me and confronted me, and they said, you know, Dad, we have no one to vote for in this election based on our value system. And I go, what do you mean? You know, they said, well, on one hand, we feel like if we're voting against the sanctity of life, and on the other hand, we feel like we're voting against the environment, which we really care about. Now, I tell you, it took me back, because I realized they were absolutely right. And then another thing sort of happened. It was funny, because, you know, the Boise Vineyard is we have a beautiful facility there. It's really a great place. And there's one room, it's as big as we call it Heritage Hall. It's a fireplace at one end, and it's got a bookstore and a coffee shop, and people come in, and a lot of people like to use it for weddings, because it's just really nice place for a wedding. And so this one day I was walking in there, and there was a wedding going on, and it was beautiful. You know, they had it all decorated. It was just gorgeous, and you know, the bride was beautiful, like all brides are, and everything was great. And this lady came up to me, who I immediately perceived as a non-churched person. Yeah, I can just tell. And the other thing I realized, she was a baby boomer, so she was sort of my generation, but she hadn't quite left the sort of the hippie era yet. And she came up to me and she said, "This is an atrocity." And I go, "What?" The first thing she said is, "Who's the pastor here?" You know, and I was like looking for anybody I could find, you know, because I knew whoever it was going to be in trouble. I could just tell. And she said, "This is an atrocity." And I said, "What?" She goes, "This is horrible." I go, "Look at this, it's beautiful. I mean, look at the bride, you know, and the cake, you know." And she says, "Look at this." She says, this was this big reception. She goes, "Look at all these aluminum cans and all this plastic, and you do not have one recycle bin in this church." You know, and I wanted to fight her, you know. But then all of a sudden the reality hit me. She was absolutely right, and I was wrong. I actually had to repent to this lady. It was tough, but I did. And I said, "You know, I am so sorry." So you got to understand, God has a way of working on people at different times. He has you majoring in certain things, and sometimes he ministers with a hatchet, you know, at least in my life. He was like, and I realized he was trying to get my attention over this issue. And so I went back to the Bible. And I looked back not only to the Bible, but I also looked back into church history. And I realized that some of the great heroes of modern day Christianity and Catholicism and Protestantism were all pro-environment and pro-creation. When I say that, I have to be careful how I say procreation, but pro-environment. And like we know the story of St. Patrick. You know, we celebrate St. Patrick every year as one who used the environment to preach the gospel to Ireland. We also, like St. Francis of Assisi, he's another one that we would all know as an early hero of the Catholic faith. Let me just read some quotes from these guys, some of these early guys. Really, those that really were founders of what we see today as modern day Catholicism and modern day Reformed Catholicism and Reformed Protestantism. St. Francis of Assisi in 1182, or about 1200, he said this: "These creatures minister to our needs every day," speaking of creation. "Without them, we could not live, and through them, the human race greatly offends the Creator. We fail every day to appreciate so great a blessing by not praising as we should the Creator and the dispenser of all these gifts, which is the miracle of creation." Martin Luther, many of you know, he created the Reformation. He was one that broke out of the religiosity of Catholicism and reformed the church in the 1500s. And he said this, he really was the founder of what we know today as Lutheranism. "The power of God is present at all places, even in the tiniest leaf. God is entirely and personally present in the wilderness, in the garden, and in the field." John Calvin, in the 1500s, he really was the Protestant reformer beyond Luther, and really would be the theological founder maybe of Presbyterianism and the Baptists. And he said this: The little birds singing are singing of God. The beasts cry unto him. The mountains echo his name. The waves and the streams cast their glances at him. The herbs and the flowers praise him. Nor do we need to labor or seek him far off, since each one of us finds God within himself, insomuch as we are all upheld and preserved by his power dwelling in us, and we can see him in all of the creation that's around us. But here's the one I like. This is Thomas Aquinas. He was probably the greatest Catholic theologian. He said this in the 1200s. He said, "It is God's custom to care for all his creatures, both the greatest and the least. We should likewise care for the creatures, whatsoever they are, in the sense that we use them in conformity with the divine purpose, in order that they may not bear witness against us on Judgment Day." That literally creation is going to bear witness against us on Judgment Day, is what he was saying. That we literally going to be held accountable for how we care for creation when it comes to Judgment Day. And so I looked at that. Then I looked back through the whole commission that I saw specifically in Genesis and the Noahic covenant, or what we know as the covenant of the rainbow. And you think of the whole story of Noah, if you believe it or not, or understand it or not. Here is this biblical picture of really a God of redemption. And here's this, the whole story is he's fed up, He's fed up with humanity because of their sin and their self-centeredness. And he decides he's going to wipe it out and start over. And so who does he preserve in the flood? He preserves righteous man and the creation, two of every kind. He started the first Endangered Species Act, if you think about it. And when he comes off of the ark, and here is this kind of this new world, this new beginning, he makes a covenant. We call it covenant of the rainbow. And a lot of people look at it and they say, well, this covenant was, it was a covenant between God and Noah. Or some say, well, no, it was a covenant, between God and man for that moment. But the truth is, it was a covenant not just between God and Noah or God and man. It was a covenant between God and all of his creation. And if you read that covenant, anytime the Bible repeats something more than once, that it's like it means it. It's like he's serious. So you're sort of supposed to pay attention. Let me just read you a piece of Genesis chapter 9. It says, "Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you." Now, covenant is agreement, right? A covenant is agreement. Like you do your part, I do my part. And we're going to have covenant together. So that's what this is. He says, "I establish my covenant with you and my descendants after you." In other words, this covenant this is going to be not just for your generation. This is going to be for every generation that's to come. This is multi-generational. "And with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that come out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth." That's who this covenant is going to be for. So it's not between you and me. It's between every plant and animal. It's all creation. And then he says, "I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be cut off from the waters of the flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant I'm making between me and you and every living creature, a covenant for all generations to come." He's repeating this, okay? You're getting it. It's like, this is not just between you and me. This is for all creation. And he says, "I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring the clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind." I'm getting it. Okay. "Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on earth." That's number 5. So God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on the earth." That's 6. He means it. And so he's saying, I'm making this agreement. If you read the whole thing, he's saying, now I am giving you this earth for your provision, but not for your abuse. And he says, and literally in there, he says, I am holding you accountable for how you care for this. And you can go back and read it. It's pretty darn clear. And we can follow it all the way through the Old Testament and then into the New Testament, even when Paul is speaking and saying, man is without excuse from knowing God because he's revealed himself through all that he's created. Well, I'm reading this stuff. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, I've got to do something about this. I've missed this somehow. And I'm not like the most well-known evangelical leader in the country, but I'm doing it. And I'm trying, And I realized I've got to do something about this. And I felt in a time of solitude with the Lord, really exploring this. For 6 months I spent really examining this before I dared say the word, because I'm in a red state, very red state, Idaho. Boise is the capital city, and I've got politicians, Republican politicians, in my church. And I'm thinking, I preach this message, I'm going to get tarred and feathered. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm scared, to be honest with you, because I've worked all these years to build this church, and now I'm going to go in and I'm rolling the dice, man. I don't know how people are going to receive this message. But finally, I preached the message. In fact, I preached a series of messages, which there's so much material here I could preach for a long time, as you're already finding out. And amazing thing happened, actually. I tell you, you go back and hear the message online, because everything we do is online, but I'll tell you, it was not the best message I ever preached in my life, because I was scared. I was nervous. And see, it's hard for someone who's outside evangelicalism to really understand what I was going through. I know that's true. Like, what's the big deal? Well, it's a big deal. And I've tried to share the history with you and why it was a big deal. Because it was literally coming against sort of a theological thought that we had established during the Jesus movement that I believe is false. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Anyway, I preached this message. And at the end of it, we do 3 services in Boise on Sunday morning. At the end of all 3 services, first time this ever happened to me in 25 years of preaching the gospel, I get standing ovations from my congregation. I mean, I'm serious. I just break into tears. I was like, I can't believe it. I didn't know. And I realized that there were Christians just sitting there waiting for their leadership to say, it's okay to care for creation. But see, I believe that discipleship, Christianity is supposed to be a verb. In other words, I believe that it's supposed to show action as its state of being. I don't believe that you're supposed to preach anything if you don't go exercise it and do it. In other words, I don't think you can tell your church that they're supposed to care for the poor if you don't have some poor for them to care for. And a means for them to go do it. It's like, you become numb and you become hardened to the gospel at that point. And so I knew immediately I had to give them things to do. Immediately, they had to go out and exercise this new truth. Well, it wasn't a new truth to Christianity, but it was a new truth to modern day Christianity, I thought. And so immediately, the next Sunday, we had recycle bins in the church. And we started printing all of our materials on recycled paper. We started handing out to our congregation green bags to go shopping with, cloth bags, instead of using plastic bags. It was awesome, because all of a sudden, all over town, people are going, because in those days, this was 3 years ago, there was no such thing as, people shopping with recyclable bags. I mean, so you'd be standing in lines and they're going, where'd you get that bag? And they go, well, we got it at our church. They go, what? Like, Christians don't believe in that. And so it created a conversation throughout Boise, and this incredible life started brewing. And I realized in the church, I had people working for the Fish and Game, people working for Soil Conservation District, people working for the Forest Service. I had all of these people, Parks and Recreation Service. They were all sitting there, and they were literally, at that point, they were Christians, but they were environmentalists, but they were living separate lives. Because at work, they were literally afraid to tell their coworkers that they were Christians, and at church, they were afraid to tell their buddies there that they were environmentalists. And so I realized I had to tear these walls down somehow. And I called the Forest Service in the Payette Forest down in southern Idaho there. And I said, I don't know much about the environment, but I figure you guys know about the environment. And one of the things that we have discovered is that Idaho is really, like Montana, is going through a tremendous growth surge. People are looking for this higher quality of life, or they're really coming for the for the beauty of these states. And yet they're coming, and with it, it's interesting, we discovered, I got this actual statistics through the Parks and Recreation, 2 guys that were on my task force, and they said, we discovered this, that as in the last, I'm going to kind of make up a statistic because it's pretty close, but forgive me if it's a little off, but it's like in the last 10 years, it's in my book accurately, I don't know what it is totally, but he said in the last 10 years, the population has increased by 10% in the valley, or in Idaho. And in that time, the use of the wilderness has decreased 10%. No, it's more than that. It was a third. And we're trying to figure that out. Like, all these people are coming here for the beauty of this state, and yet nobody's using the wilderness. And we've discovered that the reason for that was primarily because of broken families. Where my generation was raised going camping and hiking and hunting and fishing and really being out in the wilderness, the new generation, as a result primarily of broken homes, nobody was taking their kids in the mountains anymore. They weren't going on those family camping trips anymore, and they weren't hiking with their kids anymore. And I believe this, what you don't experience, you don't appreciate, and what you don't appreciate, you're not going to care for. And so I realized we have to somehow change this, and that's why I called the Forest Service. I said, I want my people in the mountains. And I want them there for a purpose, not just to be there. I want them there for a purpose. And so I said, can you give us work to do? And so there was this guy, he's actually in charge of volunteers in the Payette Forest. He says, well, everybody says they want to come up here and help, but nobody ever shows up. I promise we'll show up. So we got our people, we actually had them go through chainsaw certification, They're like wearing all this stuff. I've never used any of this stuff when I used a chainsaw, but they had to wear helmets and chaps and all this stuff. And anyway, they were all feeling they looked like Darth Vader, but they were feeling really cool. And we were training all these people. We were taking them out, and we were doing trail work. We were restoring campgrounds. And then pretty soon, we got an award for being the most dependable volunteer agency in the Payette Forest, and they started giving us new trail construction, which is unusual for volunteers to actually go cut new trails. We built a whole section of new trail, and everybody was just having a blast, and our families were out in the mountains, and pretty soon it just started building momentum. We were doing river cleanups through our city. The Boise River runs through our city like you have here, and we were floating the river, so we're having fun doing it. And we started recycling cell phones, and about that time Katrina broke out. And we wanted to get down to Katrina. I wanted to get our people into the midst of that problem. And so I went down there actually the week it happened and snuck in. I won't tell you about that, but it was illegal. But I got in there and I discovered the problems and what we could do. I called back, and said, we got to get our folks down here, but it costs money, and But we ended up sending at least a dozen of people a week for the next 6 months down into Katrina to do cleanup, tearing out drywall and carpet in homes. And we supported all of that work by recycled cell phones. We started recycling cell phones, and everybody's bringing in their cell phone. Pretty soon they got into the news that we were using recycled cell phones to support our people to go down and work into Katrina. And even the state and government agencies were starting to bring us their cell phones. And so much for church and state. The division of church and state, it was like gone. It was obliterated in Boise. It was awesome. We were all friends all of a sudden. Nobody was complaining about each other. As I progressed through it further, I realized that the environment is killing people all over this world, especially water. There's, right now there's 2.5 billion people on this planet who do not have access to drinkable water. And it's killing people. 80% of infant mortality in the third world developing nation right now is water-related disease. Cholera, malaria, dysentery disease. I thought, this has got to be grieving the heart of God. And the environment's killing people. We recognize as this global warming problem increases, that countries like Bangladesh are going to be the first to suffer. There's going to be literally millions of environmental refugees as that happens. And here is my point. if the church is denying the fact that global warming even exists, they're going to deny that we even have a problem. The very agency that should be on the very front lines of the poor will be missing the whole point. And so I started getting my people to take these environmental concerns and projects into Africa and into the Philippines. And we started working, helping and discovering ways that we could do water projects and agriculture projects. And we're starting to train young people for these kinds of jobs. Kind of a Christian Peace Corps. It's where we could go. I got so much to say to you, and I'm promising to quit here at 8, but I want to say a couple more things in my conclusion. It's not 8 yet. I just wanted to let you know that. When Jesus came and he quoted Isaiah 61, it basically said, this is why I'm here. I'm here for broken humanity. I am here to set the captive free. I am here for those who are suffering on this earth, and I'm here to bring provision to those who are plagued with guilt and shame in their life. It's interesting, if you read in the Gospel of Matthew, there's in the 24th and 25th chapter of Matthew, and I've always seen this separately. I've read, we read it kind of fragmented, and we don't put it all together, but I see it all as one message, and it comes like this. And in Matthew 24, we have the dissertation of the last days. And Jesus is really trying to explain to some of his disciples. He's sitting on the side of the hill, and he's telling them what it's going to be like when the earth starts winding down. He tells them about this, that there's going to be an escalation in world violence. There'll be wars and rumors of wars. I'm just going to highlight some of the main things that he says. There's going to be an escalation in natural disaster. There's going to be a breakdown in social and ethical values. There's going to be famine and world hunger. There's going to be increase of plague and disease. There's going to be increase of suffering humanity, basically, is what he says. Now, right from there, he goes and Jesus taught in parables. He told stories to bring other truths. And in these parables, the first thing he says, it's going to be like, the last days are going to be like in the days of Noah. He says it's going to be just like that, where people are going to be eating, drinking, they're going to be into themselves and into their own lives, and they're going to not even be aware of the condition around them, and all of a sudden it's going to happen. And everything's going to happen quickly. And then he says this, he gives 3 stories, he tells 3 stories, all of them about a landowner who owns a great estate, and he goes away and he leaves his estate in charge to a steward. And he goes away, and in each case he comes back unexpectedly. In each story, he comes back unexpectedly, unannounced. And then he judges that steward based on how he cared for his stuff, his people, the talents and the gifts that he gave his people. In fact, one is called the parable of the talents. And then he goes straight from there into another dissertation on his second coming and what it's going to be like. And then he says this, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, this is the second coming of Christ, he will sit upon his glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats, and he will place the sheep at his right hand, and his goats on his left hand. So he says he's coming back just like he did with these stewards, and he's going to basically judge them based on how they took care of his stuff. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. Then he goes this, and maybe this will be familiar to some of you. He says, "For I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me into your home. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you cared for me. I was in prison and you visited me." And his disciples said to him, he says, "Lord, when did that happen? When were you ever thirsty and you didn't have something to drink, or hungry and you didn't have something to eat? When did that ever happen?" His response to them was this, "As you did it to the least of these, you did it to me." So as you did it to them, you were ministering to me. This is the heart of God, is that he cares for broken humanity, and he's calling his church above all to carry on his commission to care for broken humanity. And I'm telling you right now, the environment is causing humanity to suffer all over this globe. And it's going to get a lot worse very quick. We are in a perfect storm, I want to tell you. And we're, even by trying to solve some of the problems, we're creating new ones. We've got an energy crisis. Duh. You know, you just go try to fill up your diesel pickup these days. Like a good Montanan wood, you know. You go, it's not like it was a year ago. We've got a problem, and so we know. So we're trying to come up with sustainable fuels and alternate fuels. And so one of the things that we've tried to do is figure out how we could do it through agriculture, through biofuel, or through ethanol. And so we're using now corn and grain to put in the tanks of our SUVs. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad idea. The farmers like it. And I think that farmers need help. But the problem is that corn and that grain was being used by this nation to feed the hungry of the world. And now, for the very first time in human history, food and fossil fuel are connected at the hip. When one goes up, the other goes up. We are now living in a globalized world. And in this globalized world, it's a very small world. And food is being produced all over this world. And so you go here to Albertsons and buy a tomato, it probably was grown in South America. And it took fossil fuel to bring it here. It took fossil fuel in the form of fertilizer to grow it. And we go, well, that's not so bad. I mean, tomatoes may have gone up a little bit, but it's not horrible. But the problem is this: because we're a globalized world, over 50% of this world is living on less than $2 a day. And the price of that tomato is the same for them now as it is for us, or it's moving in that direction. We are about to see world hunger in a way we've never seen it before. Trying to solve and maintain the American lifestyle. I just wrote a new book. It's called Small Footprint, Big Handprint. And it's calling especially Christians, because those are the ones I'm concerned about, to a new lifestyle. But it really is calling all of America to a new lifestyle. We have got to downsize our life so that we can upsize our effectiveness and impact on this world. We've got to get out and help. And we can no longer live what we were living, the great American dream, anymore. It's becoming rapidly the great American nightmare. We're in trouble. And we've got to face it. And I feel that the call that's on my particular life is to awaken evangelical Christianity. Do you know that 90% of this nation professes Christ as Savior? And they believe to some degree or another that this book has truth. And if I can convince them that this is the truth and this is what the heart of God says right now, you'd have 90% of this nation changing their way of life. Maybe they drive a smaller car, ride a bicycle, grow some food at home, not to be so dependent on the remainder and what's left of fossil fuel. This fossil fuel is valuable stuff, you know. To burn fossil fuel and just burn it into the atmosphere, I don't care if it's causing global warming or not. It's an atrocity. It's a moral disaster, because that fossil fuel has got to be there for generations to come until the Lord returns, in my mind. And it's used for medicine, it's used for synthetics, it's used for so many good things that could be recycled and be reused. Instead, we're just burning it into the atmosphere. Now we've got China and India in the mix. And they're becoming affluent nations, and never before have we had to compete for fossil fuel as Americans. And now they want what we want. They want the great American dream. Not only are they driving cars, I used to go to China a lot back in the early 80s. There wasn't a car in China in those days. They were all riding bicycles. I watched a guy one time drive he's taking a full-grown hog to market on the back of his bicycle. I couldn't believe it. They were very innovative people. You can do it. That's what amazed me. You can actually do it. You don't need a 3/4-ton pickup to do that. And I said, now those folks want what we've had. And they're people too. But now they have access to it. And not only that, but they want to eat beef, because that's what affluent people do. And beef require corn and grain. And so there is not only going to be a fight over what's left of the fossil fuel on this earth, but also the corn and the grain. And also, I want to tell you, the greatest fight is going to be over fresh water. The quality of the water on planet Earth is in rapid decline. We got problems. I got a lot more to say, but I guess I'm going to quit because I'm supposed to and I want to be obedient. But I have this tendency, you know, it's like I like to preach. So I'm sorry about that, but I'm like really, really passionate about this. Nancy and I, you know, it's been fun for us because we're kind of returning to the life we lived at first, and we're building a lead home right now. I don't know if you know what a lead home is, but I really want to practice what I preach and exercise this, and so, you know, it's a major deal to do that. You know, a lead home is an energy-free home. Basically, it produces as much energy as it uses. If it's a high-level lead home, I mean, it's you know, insulated like beyond belief. It's got like R40/50 insulation. It just takes nothing to heat it or cool it. You split off the gray water off of your sewage. You use solar energy for hot water and solar energy for electricity. And so we're building this home right now, but we're also incorporating organic orchards and gardens, and we're going to be raising fish. We're trying to use it as a training place too for young people that have a heart to take these values to the developing world. And so this is the life we're living right now. It's a great challenge. It's been a lot of fun in many ways. But we're starting a new organization called Reform. And Reform really is an organization where, I did it, you're proud of me, where we're connecting what we consider the 7 crises of the world, because we realize, you know, you can't separate world health from the environment, because, you know, like I said, it's the water that's causing the health problems. Malaria is a major epidemic now, especially in countries like Zambia, a place where we're working right now. But all of these things when you water in the environment, the decline of soil, deforestation, all of these things are damaging, and also globalization is damaging the ability for the poor to grow food anymore. And so we have to go and help in some of these areas, but we realize that is an environmental problem. So World Hunger has to address the environment. World Health has to address the environment. But actually, even human trafficking, right now, today, in this day, there are 1 million children right now being abducted and taken into human sex trade on this world every year. Slavery, the human slave trade today is worse than it ever was in the days of William Wilberforce. We thought it was abolished, and yet it's horrid right now, and much of it is it's inhumane, and I mean, it's horrid. But all of that's being driven by poverty, and so much of poverty is being driven by the environment. And what we're trying to do now is gather these agencies that are around this nation and start conversations. We're starting to bring them together and really educate, especially, and of course my world is the evangelical world. I'm trying to educate the evangelical world to the crisis that's out there right now, but not just to talk about the crisis, but also to bring solutions. There are solutions. There really are solutions. There is hope. And I want to tell you, if you're in here tonight and you're 20 years old and you're going to hear next week why 20-year-olds are going to change all this, I'm telling you, you are the hope. But I also believe that the church is the hope. I believe the church is the hope because I believe this is an ethical, moral problem. And I believe that until you change the environment of a man's heart, you are not going to change the environment of a community, a nation, or a world. You've got to come to this place of realizing it's no longer about number one. It's not about me having it now, having the most, having it all for me, and not worrying about the next generation. That is sin. So we have to start there. And people have to awaken to the idea that this is absolutely not right and it's not acceptable. And until that happens, you don't have what Paul called the transformation and the renewal of the mind, a whole new worldview, a whole new world to think about if you haven't had your heart first transformed and said, I want it different and I want to be used in this hour. I don't want to just downsize my life and retreat and live for myself. But I also want to make the big handprint. I want to go out and change this world and make a difference in this world, because I believe that God put me on this world, in this world, gave me gifts, gave me abilities, gave me talents, and is even going to hold me accountable to how well I use the life that He gave me. Amen. Now this is the part I don't like. This is the part, see, when I preach, nobody else gets to talk back, and then I can leave, and if you disagree, then it's okay. But no, this has been fun for me, because in these, I love these discussions. So if you're here and you have comments, even questions, even kind criticisms, go ahead, yes.
So who did you vote for?
I'm having trouble. I'm having trouble, really. Yeah, but let me say this. Let me say this, because I just want to tell you, in the role that I play, I am non-political. I do not preach politics, and so I wouldn't ever share that with my own congregation, to be honest with you. That's a personal, private matter for me, and I don't even tell my kids anymore. So, but it is. It's a problem when you care about all this. So you are looking for someone that shares your heart and your values. So I'm sorry, but I just try to keep my faith and politics separate. Yes?
With all due respect to you and your faith, the number, and you mentioned it earlier in your talk.
Population. I knew you said that. Everybody asked that.
These are all symptoms of the root cause of everything.
Okay. Let me just...
That humanity has encountered.
Right.
And all religions have never come to grips with how they're going to deal with that in order to deal with all these symptoms.
Right.
So,
okay,
the biblical solution to me
okay.
is for the churches of the world, the religions of the world, to deal with population, overpopulation.
And I think that conversation really is arising. Here's the thing, True, and I'll tell you this. I do not believe that abortion is the answer to this. And yeah, I know that, but I just want to say it, because people might as well get the gorilla out of the room, I believe, we know for a fact that the one thing that helps population growth, the one thing that changes it, is literacy. And you look at the nations that are literate, they're in zero population growth. So I'm saying we need to get out and educate and inform. That's one of the things that we're doing. So people become aware. Ignorance, just, I don't know why, but it creates problems.
But if 2.2 million people don't have enough food to eat, you mentioned.
No, I know.
And they're struggling, and they're day to day, they don't care about literacy. They care about feeding them.
That's right. So we need to get out in the world and educate the world, because that is the proven way of slowing down population. Now, on the other hand, nature has a way of dealing with stuff too.
And that's what disease is all about, regulating the population.
Right. So then there's that whole discussion about modern medicine, and, but on the other hand, where you have suffering humanity, I feel personally I'm going to be held accountable to how I care for those folks.
A lot of the things that you mentioned are really asking for brain tumors. Like you said, whether people understand it or not, the crisis is here, and it's because of overpopulation.
I'm going to ask that we give some other folks a chance
Sure.
to ask our questions too. Feel free to
Yeah.
come
We can talk later too. Yes.
Me?
Yes. Okay.
Is this organization that you're talking about church-based in Boise, or is it?
Presently, it's church-based in Boise. In fact, it's just something new that we're developing right now. We're actually having a conference in September where we're actually bringing these leaders together. And there's actually information out there if you're interested in coming. We'd love to have you there. Because it's what it is. It's not someone lecturing. It really is discussions by experts in the field. Yes?
You talked about tending to the wilderness by putting in trails, etc. There are those who say you should just leave the wilderness alone. How do you deal with that? That the creatures in the world need to be left alone by God in order to live.
Well, I think that, you know, this is my this isn't political, so I can say this, okay? I know that because I took my kids in the mountains, they love the mountains, and they now really have a deep desire to care for it. And so I think that trails are one way, natural way to get them in there. I think there's a lot of unnatural ways to get in the wilderness, which I would, you know, that upsets me. And I know it's true. I'm a hunter. And I know that wherever there's a logging road, there's no game, you know. You've got to get further and further back in the mountains to find game. And so I do think it needs to be preserved and protected. I'm an advocate of the wilderness of Idaho, that's for sure. We have the largest wilderness area in the continental United States in Idaho now. And I think if it's properly used, it's actually going to help the problem, not hurt the problem. Because, like I said, what you don't experience, you don't appreciate. What you don't appreciate, you're not going to care for. If a new generation is playing computer games, and that's how they're spending their time, they're not going to care. Yes?
You talked about how globalization was a problem in the context of fossil fuel and food. How do you see the role of globalization in a Christian context and in a religious context? I mean, it seems like your work is spreading, you know, and seeking to spread and influence the world. How do you match those two together?
Yeah, I think that the human race is the human race, and that wherever it is and wherever it's suffering, I think that's the front lines. And I think that's where the church should be. I think our first call really is to the poor and to the broken. I think Isaiah 61 is really it's the biblical mandate. It's the ministry of Jesus, and it's the ministry that we were commissioned to. And so in that sense, I think we need to be out there, you know. But I'm just saying it's inevitable, some of the problems that we're about to face. And I just think we do need to look at renewable energies. We need to look for solutions, and we need to look quickly at those things, you know. Because I can't personally control the world population or those things, so I just got to do what I can do. And the world's getting small, but it might get a little bigger now that you can't get around as easy, you know. It's getting harder. I mean, flying, they say in the next 5 years, flying is going to be like it was when it started. It'll be kind of an elitist thing, you know. So the world might, but then on the other hand, because we're globalized, you know, you can get Ebola from Southern Africa to LA in less than 24 hours now. And so we've got new challenges as a result. There's no question. I don't have the solutions. I just know that I've got to do what I can do. Yes? Yes?
I was just wondering, when you were talking about how, like, man needs to open up his heart, and, like, if one, like, culture is suffering, that, you know, more fortunate cultures should care about them. And I was just wondering if you've heard of the Gaia hypothesis, and, like, how you feel that connects to, like...
No, tell me.
The Gaia hypothesis? It's like a hypothesis by a guy named Brigitte Spurgeon named Lovelock, and it's the idea that the whole world, maybe not literally, is like a living being, like in itself. So like every living thing on the earth is like connected.
Yeah.
And that, so if one part of it's hurting, then like another that is hurting.
Well, that's surely true in nature.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just was hoping that you...
You'll have to, yeah. No, but I'll have to look at that, because you know that's true, and as the world becomes smaller, it's more true, you know. So that somebody, oh, yes.
I was wondering why you feel you can't talk to your congregation about
Politics.
about population control. It doesn't have to be...
Oh, no, I do. Oh, no, I would do that. I just say that abortion's not the answer, and I just threw that out because I thought, you know, Everybody wonders that. But I do believe we've actually, you can see here, illiteracy is our thing, because we have discovered that that really is the primary issue in population growth. And so I don't know what totally to do about it. But
You talk about it, that's what you do.
you start talking about it, but you've actually got to take action. And so one of the things we're doing is we put a task force together of folks that are really exploring this. And one of the things we're doing right now, we started, for example, a trade school in Zambia, because this is a hotbed for human trafficking there, because it's right on the border. Where we're working is a very, very poor area near the Congo border. And so where there's desperate poverty, first of all, if you're in Africa and you're a woman and you have sex outside of marriage, you're going to die. That's just the facts, because AIDS is that rampant in these very poverty-stricken areas. And women know that. And so they know at this point, they get to these extreme places of poverty where they have no way to feed their children. The husband's already dead. And so they come to this issue. I can die a slow death, or I can die a fast death. A slower death is AIDS, a faster death is starvation, and my kids go with me. So they'll naturally take to prostitution. So and you can't blame them for that or judge them for that. I mean, they're just trying to survive. And so what we're trying to do is go in there and provide other means for those women. So we started a sewing school, for example, right there in this very poverty-stricken area. Now, I'm one church, right? And there's just a little bit that I can do. But if you get the whole world working on this, and especially the whole affluent world, with catching the heart of God for this, we can go and do this everywhere. And start networking and working together. That's the other thing I'm saying. We've got to break down these barrier walls. I hope you heard me say that. It's just that I'm called to this particular group of people, and God's given me the great privilege of speaking in a forum like this. But primarily, I've got to just do the little piece I can do, because I feel that's being faithful. Because I know that God blesses small beginnings. I've seen it happen over and over again. And so we're trying to go in and do that. In a way, that's a form of education. In a way, that's dealing with this issue of literacy. And so I will challenge my church, and I say, we have got to get out. I call it the adventure, because the adventure is Advent-URE. And there's the first and second advent of Jesus, and I say the greatest adventure is living a life of radical faith between the first and second coming of Jesus. We don't know when the second one is, so what we do in this life is key. And I'll tell you something, there is no greater adventure in this world than getting out there into a broken world and doing what you can do. I mean, I'll tell you, it just changes your whole life. It's changed my life. And it's the most rewarding thing that a person can possibly do. So I think the church has to create the avenues and the access to the poor, because most people wouldn't even know where to begin. Yes?
You're doing a lot in your church, it sounds like even globally. So I'm wondering, your funding for all that, do all your parishioners tithe?
Yeah, I mean, it's a shoestring operation. There's no question about it. But, you know, when people capture this heart, they sacrifice for this. They'll give of themselves, and they'll give of their finances to go do this stuff. All of our people go, and they're self-supported when they go. So, and you know, there again, we can only just do what we can do. And we can go as far as our finances can take us, but it's amazing how supernatural it is, how the Lord provides. But even the thing like the cell phones, I mean, we put more people into New Orleans in 6 months than any other agency in our city, by far. The Red Cross or anybody. And those people did a lot of hard work, and it was all supported. To me, God provided the money, you know. People went door to door asking people for their cell phones and their old ink cartridges, their computer ink cartridges, and we used the recycled money from that to do it. So, I don't know, it's just I say God provides, but that's the language I use, you know, and I find that it's true. Yes?
I love what I'm hearing so far, but I can't help but think that you're a small part of the whole evangelicalism religion. What do you say about all the other preachers that don't agree with you, and how are you working to change that?
I just say they're wrong, and You know, it's funny because 3 years ago, and I wrote Saving God's Green Earth 3 years ago, and it was highly criticized, as you can imagine, especially by the religious right. But you cannot believe the momentum that's been built in the last 3 years. It's just phenomenal. You know, then PBS did this thing, and then all this, you know, I do probably radio interviews at least every week now. The word is just going out. I'm actually, I got to tell you, I'm so proud because I'm a, 60s baby boomer, right? I actually have an article in Mother Earth News next fall, so I was like, that's like, I've arrived. I feel like I've really arrived. So anyway, but I just keep hammering it, and it's amazing that how the Lord has given me a great voice. And writing books helps, I think. Yes?
The UN climate negotiations are supposed to produce a global emissions deal.
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you.
The UN climate negotiations are on a timetable to produce a global emissions deal to address global warming, and it has to be agreed by December 2009. If that doesn't happen, there's a date that whole process will fall apart, and impacts will be intensifying at the point where it may get out of our control very easily, very quickly. The main thing holding back that process is the same thing that's been holding it back since the 1990s, and that's the policy of the U.S. government. We refuse to commit to emission reductions, and we go to these international meetings and we actively interfere in the progress of negotiations. Now, in the 1960s, the Southern Baptist Church felt that the issue of civil rights was enough to advocate mass civil disobedience. Do you feel like the threat of global warming is enough for you to advocate your church to get involved in civil disobedience?
There's a question. I have to write a book about that. Yeah. Here's what I think. I tell people this. I said, if people have the heart of God, they'll vote right. And when I say right, I mean correct. Yeah. And I try to make that clear. And so I feel here's my job, honestly. And I think what you're saying is true. I just know my piece of this is to convince those that will listen to me that God cares about creation and that we have responsibility and stewardship. And I believe with the momentum that I'm feeling in evangelical Christianity right now over this issue, Christians vote. And people who are running for office care about the Christian vote because it can make and break what they're doing. So I'm doing my piece even though I'm staying out of politics.
What about civil disobedience, though?
Yeah.
Getting arrested.
Yeah, I know. I got people in my church getting arrested all the time. Yeah.
I mean, I applaud what you're doing. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I know how difficult it is.
I would never tell anybody to go get arrested. I might go get arrested, but I wouldn't,
That would be effective.
Yeah. You're just like all these other guys, just like a masochist, yes.
Your interpretation of the Bible seems pretty effective at engaging a group of people that I initially would not have thought would have been interested in this sort of movement. It makes me much more hopeful. I'm personally not religious, and I just wanted to know what you thought about how this sort of perspective might apply to other religions, if it would apply.
Well, first of all, what I read is Old Testament, which means it applies to Judaism as well, for sure. I got to tell you this, though. I got to make this point. And in fact, I want to just read you one thing real quickly here, because I love what you just said, that you're not religious. Because somewhere here, the thing that I think people miss, and I appreciate the fact that you said that I did this in a way that engaged you. Because first of all, God is not a judgmental God, and I think people misperceive that. The other thing that most people misperceive is God's not religious. He hates religion. And I've read Isaiah 61, or I've told you what Isaiah 61 said, but in Isaiah 58, this is a powerful passage to me because he's talking about religious people here. God is. This is a prophecy. God is speaking here. He says, he's talking about how pious his people have been, religious people have been. And they come to the temple every day, and they seem delighted to learn about me. They act like a religious nation that would never abandon the laws of its God. Now, I read this and I see America, and I, you know, in many ways. And I see also the church in many ways, unfortunately. People who come, they act like religious nation. They would never abandon my laws of God. They ask me to take action on their behalf. And you know, you see things like 9/11 and things. Everybody's on their knees asking God for help at those moments. You know, pretending that they want to hear me. We have fasted before you, they say. Why aren't you impressed with us? This is God speaking to us, okay? We have been very hard on ourselves, and you don't even notice it. I tell you why I respond. This is the Lord saying this. It's because you are fasting to please yourselves. Even while you fast, you keep on oppressing your workers. What good is fasting, which is a religious action in this case, when you keep on fighting and quarreling? This kind of fasting will never get you anywhere with me, the Lord says. You humble yourselves by going around through motions of penance, bowing your heads like reeds, bending to the wind, bouncing back and forth. You dress in burlap and you cover yourself with ashes. Like you look really religious, you act really religious. Is this what you call fasting? Do you really think this will please the Lord? Then he says this, no, this is the kind of fasting I want. This is the Lord speaking. He says, free those who are wrongly imprisoned. Lighten the burden of those who work for you. Let your oppressors go free and remove the chains that bind the people. Share your food with the hungry. I'll just read a little bit. And give shelter to the homeless. Give your clothes to those who need them. And do not hide from your relatives who need your help. Well, we'll maybe throw that one out. And then your salvation will come like the dawn, and your wounds will quickly heal. Your godliness will lead you forward, and the glory of the Lord will protect you from harm. Now, then the Lord's going to move. But he says, I hate religion too. So he just agrees with you.
I guess what I really meant.
So I'm preaching again, I know, but that's the problem.
What I wanted to say was that I'm an atheist, and I wanted to know if you thought that the same sort of moral structure could be created or even exist for people who don't believe in God that could instigate the same sort of idea that does.
Yeah.
That's provided by your religious structure.
Well, you know, from my perspective, no, I don't think so. I don't think without really a relationship with God, you'd never capture this heart. Okay, I know. And we can talk about it. But I want to tell you something. God loves you. If you know it or not, He does. He loves you. And He's... And you know, you look at nature, and you love nature, and you love the things that He's created. And so I don't think you're as far away as you think. Yes?
We're out of time for questions.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
This is so much fun.